What I've Done. Written by Night Breeze. Read by No One and Nobody. Chapter 2. My ears perked up at the sound of someone messing with something cloth-like nearby. I wasn't sure what they were doing, but whatever it was preventing me from sleeping. At least, that was what woke me up at first. What was really keeping me up now was the growling in the pit of my stomach and the ache in my muscles. Again, I had to marvel at whatever drug that the ponies had me on. It was keeping my pain down to a minimum, yet at the same time wasn't clouding my mind. At least, I didn't think it was clouding my mind. The last time I had been on morphine, I had thought that there had been absolutely nothing wrong with me. In fact, I had believed that I was at the top of my game, despite the fact that both my legs had been broken at the time.
"Hey, nurse, is there any chance I could get something to eat?"
I croaked as I opened my eyes. The room was bright, but not nearly at the same eye-bleeding level as it was before. I couldn't decide whether it was because the room's brightness had dimmed or because my eyes were starting to adjust. But I figured that it wasn't really important at the moment. What was important was the blurry nurse that was making her way over to my bed. I couldn't really tell what sort of expression she had on her face, but her movements seemed sure enough. So I assumed that she wasn't showing any fear or anything like that. She reached the side of my bed, and her face finally swam into focus, allowing me to make out her expression. She seemed to be a little worried, though she still smiled despite whatever fears that she might have been harboring. I noticed that she was a Pegasus pony with a light blue coat and dark green mane and tail, both of which were cut short. On her head was what appeared to be an old-style nurse's cap, while on her flank was a green line that turned into a seemingly random series of sharp valleys and mountains, before turning back into a single green line again. I didn't want to make any snap judgments, but it looked like the readout of a heart monitor. She said something in her musical language in the form of a question, though what it wasn't something I could understand. Big surprise there. I just smiled at that, thankful for just the sensation of being able to smile again.
"I can't really understand what you're saying, but I'd appreciate it if I could get some food,"
I said softly. She just smiled at this and nodded as she waved a hoof in a distinct "wait" motion. At least, that's how I interpreted it. For all I knew, it meant, "Begin shooting fire from your eyes when I say so." But somehow I doubted it. At any rate, she quickly left the room, despite my lack of understanding. I was then left to my own thoughts for a while, but I was sort of expecting that. It wasn't like the doctor was waiting just outside my room, nor was it feasible that those who could communicate with me would be on call 24/7, especially if I had been unconscious for an extended period of time. Man, if I was in a month-long coma, I'm going to be so ticked off, I thought as the door creaked open again. I turned my head to see who had entered, but was foiled again by my terrible eyesight.
"I sure hope that my new eyes nearsightedness goes away soon. It's getting old fast,"
I said as the blurry yellow and white blob slowly resolved itself into the shape of a unicorn mare. She had a yellow coat, red hair, and appeared to be wearing a white doctor's lab coat. On her flank, I could see what looked like a stethoscope, superimposed over a heart. At this point, I was seriously reconsidering my previous assumption that those tattoos were some sort of clan thing. There honestly didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the marks, not to mention that some of them didn't seem to make any sense.
"Best to wait until I'm actually able to ask them about it,"
I thought to myself as the unicorn levitated a clipboard and quill in front of her. She took a couple of looks at me, marked a few things on her clipboard, then nodded to herself as she put it down onto the bedside table next to me.
You wouldn't happen to be able to do that translation trick the others do, would you? Because I'm getting kind of hungry, and these straps are starting to chafe a little,"
I said nervously, as I gave an experimental tug to the straps. If she had understood my question, she didn't show it, instead opting to give me a soul-searching look as she tilted her head to the side. I wasn't too comfortable with the glare being directed towards me, so I scooted back as much as my restraints would allow me, while simultaneously chuckling nervously. Hi? I asked her intelligently. I'm guessing that she found whatever it was that she was looking for, because she said something in that musical language of hers, then proceeded to take some more notes on her clipboard. She then turned and walked over to the door, though she didn't leave the room. Instead, she merely poked her head out and said something to someone on the other side of the door. She then walked back to the side of the bed and put on her stethoscope, leaning over me to listen to my heart. As she pulled my blanket down, I realized that I was still completely naked. That wasn't really a problem at this point, but it probably would have made me blush had this scenario happened before my capture. As she made a few more notes on her clipboard, the door opened again. However, at this point, it seemed that my eyes had finally started to work properly again, allowing me to see who had entered my room. I nearly choked when I saw that it was the mayor from my dreams.
"How is he?"
Princess Luna asked Dr. Tendercare as the princess entered the room.
"His heart is strong, though he seems to be hungry. If the rumbling from his stomach means the same thing for his species that it means for ponies,"
Care said as she hung the stethoscope around her neck again.
"Well, then let us see what our friend would like to eat,"
Luna said as she charged her horn to cast her translation spell on the recovering human, herself, and Dr. Tendercare.
"What you are?"
Alex asked as soon as the spell had taken effect.
"We have spoken before, though you weren't able to see the last time that we met,"
Luna reminded him gently.
"My name is Luna."
There was a brief spark of recognition in Alex's eyes, though he quickly covered it up as he arranged his face into a more guarded expression. Princess Luna could understand that, despite everything that had happened, he was still essentially at the mercy of an alien species.
"Who wouldn't feel defensive in that kind of situation?"
Luna thought to herself.
"What do me today?"
Alex asked carefully.
"Well, we were thinking that if you were up to it, we could try to get some food into you. We would also like to run some tests to see if we can get your body's immune system to stop trying to kill the rest of your body,"
Dr. Care said as she marked a few things on her clipboard. The human just gave her a confused look at that, but nodded anyway.
"Yes, very hungry. Need food," he said.
"Well, you haven't had solid food in you for a while, so let's start you on something light and see where we can go from there,"
Dr. Care said with a nervous smile.
"Yes. Can get arms free?"
Alex asked hesitantly. Dr. Care thought about this for a second.
"I don't see any problem with that. It's been a couple of days since you last lost control of your limbs, so it appears that what we have you on is doing its job,"
she said as her horn began to glow. After a few seconds of her horn glowing, all four of the padded restraints that held the human down to the hospital bed suddenly released themselves, allowing the human movement once again.
"Thank you,"
he said as he started to push himself up into a sitting position. He was having trouble with that, however, as his strength still hadn't quite returned to him. Luckily, he wasn't alone, and he quickly found himself upright with the help of the two mirrors in the room.
"Thank you twice,"
he said with a rueful smile.
"You're welcome,"
Dr. Care said as she turned to leave.
"I'll be right back. I just need to talk to the nurse for a second to see what we can do about getting you some food."
He just nodded at that as he watched the doctor go, leaving him alone with the Princess of the Night. He didn't acknowledge her at first, instead taking a moment to examine his arms and chest with his hands and eyes. As he did so, Luna took a moment to examine the human as well. Although she couldn't really tell his height from here, she already knew that his full height was around 6 feet. His face looked strange, to tell the truth. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, nor was it terrifying like his previous face had been. It was just different. Where there had once been a gaunt, skull-like appearance, there was now a much fuller look, though his face still looked oddly flat compared to a pony's. His nose was small, looking almost like a tiny button, while his rather small mouth looked almost comical compared to the maw that he used to have. The lips of his mouth were also an odd shade of pink, though why that was completely beyond her. Above his nose, she could see 2 beady gray eyes that were filled with intelligence. Oddly enough, his irises did not change size as a pony's did, though his eyes were still incredibly expressive in their own right. Just above the eyes, she could see 2 tiny tufts of dark red hair, while on the top of his head was a much larger tuft of hair of the same color. The hair was short and fine, although that wasn't really a surprise, seeing that he had only started growing it back about a week ago. She noticed that he also seemed to be developing a bit of a red scruff on his new cheeks, lips, and underneath his chin. As her eyes moved down, she saw that his torso was very reminiscent of a minotaur's, though not nearly at the same width or bulk. She winced a bit when her eyes roamed to where his arms connected to his upper body, her sight lingering on the thin, spiderweb-like tendrils of sickly-looking gray that emanated from those 2 points. His arms, which were of the exact same color, looked thin and sickly. This was hardly expected, though, because the regeneration magic they had applied hadn't worked on the 2 artificial limbs. The same went for his legs, too. Well, that wasn't exactly true. The magic had worked, but his body didn't recognize his arms or legs as part of his body anymore. As a result of this, his body had started attacking his artificial limbs, while simultaneously attempting to grow new ones in their stead. That last bit had been the fault of the spell, so the doctors had made a judgment call to refrain from removing his limbs like they had done with his eyes when he had started growing a new pair of those. They had also augmented the regeneration spell to prevent him from growing new limbs as well. Their reasoning had been that they thought it would have been too dangerous for the human had they gone ahead and amputated the limbs. Their reasoning had been sound. The doctors had thought that Alex would probably have succumbed to the shock of such a treatment. Not only would he have lost all 4 of his limbs, his eyes, and a number of the cybernetic enhancements that they had already removed, but his body also had to adjust to the fact that its entire genetic code had been rewritten in a matter of hours. However, Luna couldn't help but feel that they had saved him from a quick death on the operating table, only to condemn him to a slow and agonizing one, as his body slowly killed itself.
Was out how long?
He asked as he stared down at his hands.
About 7 days, maybe a little longer,
she told him as she came a little closer. He nodded at this, though his eyes never left his hands.
It seems not real. All time spent in forest. So long as monster, but could have got helped,
he said as he lifted his shaking hands to his face. He then smiled, almost as if something funny had just occurred to him.
I am not strong. Not my arms. Fake arms. Stronger than real arms. Yet not strong. Not that complain. Good that not strong. Not hurt pony. Just curious.
Princess Luna smiled sadly at that.
That would probably be a combination of the drugs in your system and the lack of meat that you've consumed while you were under. We took a look at your unnatural limbs, and it seems that they use the nutrients that are in meat as fuel. You should regain your strength after a couple of meals, she said as Tendercare came back into the room. The human didn't look like he understood what had been said, though he didn't really get a chance to ask about it as the doctor approached his bedside. There. Food is on its way. While we wait, though, I'd like to take a few seconds to perform a simple examination to see how well you're doing,
Dr. Care said as she levitated her clipboard towards her. He just nodded at this and sat docilely as Care began to examine him. Everything was going fine, up until the point where Care started to shine a light in his eyes.
What?
Alex shouted as he tried to fend off the doctor, his face a mask of fear as he brought up an arm to smack her face out of the way. If he had had his full strength, or if his claws had been unsheathed at the moment, he would have caused some serious damage. That being said, the most damage he had done had been to surprise the doctor while simultaneously rolling himself out of bed, pulling the blanket that had covered him off as he went.
Are you all right?
Luna asked the doctor as she and the mare made their way to the human's side.
I am, though I am more concerned with that fear response,
Care said grimly as she gently placed a hoof on the still-quivering human's shoulder. Luna lied down next to the frightened human and gently covered him in a wing.
Shh,
she hushed.
It's okay. They aren't here. They can't get you from here.
After several minutes of this, the human finally seemed to stop shaking, and his breathing started to level out.
I'm apology,
he grunted as he curled up into a tighter ball.
It's okay. You didn't mean it,
Luna said. Despite her words, though, Princess Luna knew that it was far from okay. They may have mended his physical wounds, but underneath that pale, hairless skin was a broken spirit. And that was a far more difficult wound to heal.
I think we should just hand over this alien. Hand over the artifacts that you've recovered from this craft and be done with it,
Silverback said as he folded his arms.
All they want is their pet monster, right? If we hand it over, they should leave us alone.
Celestia merely shook her head at that.
There's no way to know that for sure. These aliens have already shown their willingness to pluck innocent people from their homes, without cause or provocation. They may leave us alone, true, but they also might enslave us in the same manner that they enslaved the survivor of the crash. Another issue, though none to say. Why do our enemies delay?
Mouthpiece Ebele asked curiously.
They strike but once, then retreat. Surely they know we'd be an easy defeat. A week has passed since their last attack. What is the information we lack?
Silverback sat back at that, deep in thought.
That is actually a good point. It's been a week since they've tried to recover their property. Why do they wait? Are they amassing for a large-scale invasion? Are they preparing to bombard us from orbit? What are they waiting for?
He asked with a snort. Gustav had remained oddly silent for the past half hour, however. Since his previous statement of how doomed they were, the black and gray griffin had done nothing but listen, almost as if he were waiting for something. Finally, with a sharp rap of his talons, he brought the attention of the other delegates to him. I want to see it.
See what?
Celestia asked, curiously. I want to see this alien that has caused so much trouble, albeit though no fault of its own, Gustav explained. It is clear that we do not have a full measure of what these aliens are, and what they can do. I suggest that we question this creature as soon as possible, to gain a better understanding of our opponents. Celestia shook her head at this.
I can let you see him, but there's a problem with asking him about his time spent among them.
What is that?
The event has traumatized him, marking his soul with a wound deeper than the most battle-scarred veteran. We might be able to get some answers out of him, but it will take time, far more than what we have available.
Gustav nodded at this, then stood up. I still think it is important to see him with my own eyes. Sometimes the best way to learn the measure of your enemy is to see firsthand the fruits of their efforts. I would gaze upon the scars of this soul myself. Celestia nodded at this, then smiled sadly.
As you wish, Chancellor. Though be careful, he isn't a mindless monster, nor is he a soldier. He is a civilian, and as such, was never prepared for the horrors that had befallen him.
Gustav nodded at this. All the more reason to see what these aliens have wrought. The true measure of an enemy is not how they treat captured soldiers, but how they treat captured civilians.
To that I agree, and would join you, my friend,
Silverback said as he stood up. Lady Ibele nodded at this.
As would I, though haste we make. With the oracle, counsel I must take. Though many of these events she might be aware, insight and inspiration she may declare.
After that final statement, the council hall soon emptied itself, leaving behind nothing but the table, chairs, and the echo of fear that they all felt for the future. If you're enjoying this reading, consider checking out the non-copyright infringement version available on Amazon Prime. See link in video details for more information.